The first whispers of the disease arrived like rumors, too outlandish to be taken seriously. A woman in a small town, a mother of 3, collapsed while making dinner. By the time her husband found her, her skin had turned ashen, and her breath was nothing more than a faint rattle. At first it seemed like an isolated tragedy. Then it happened again, and again. Different towns, different countries, but always the same victims, women and girls struck down with no warning. Some lasted hours, others lingered for days in a state of decay that no doctor could explain. But it didn't take long for the truth to sink in. The world was losing its women. Panic spread faster than the disease. Governments imposed quarantines, locked borders and mandated curfews, but nothing worked. The cause was unknown. No pathogen, no poison, no treatment. Men watched helplessly as the women they loved slipped away. And then came the violence. Society, in its desperation, began to unravel. Dr. Matthew Fennel watched it all from his private laboratory in the mountains. Unlike the rest of the world, he had prepared. For years he had suspected that the world was heading toward collapse, not from war, but from within. Humanity's reliance on nature, on the delicate balance between life and death, had always been a fragile thing. And now, nature had turned against them. It was time for something better. Inside his fortress, hidden far from the madness, he worked day and night. His research had once been considered controversial, even dangerous. Artificial reproduction, synthetic wombs, genetic engineering, it had all been theoretical until now. But now, with the world burning, he had the opportunity and the power to put his theories into practice. As women continued to die, men began to turn on each other. Fennel saw the chaos on his screens. Men fighting in the streets, hoarding their wives and daughters like treasures. Women were no longer partners, they were commodities. The last, precious key to human survival. Fennel had no time for such barbarism. While others fought for what was left, he focused on what would come next. The first few experiments were failures, grotesque, misshapen things that never survived past the first breath. But each failure taught him something. Each failure brought him closer to perfection. It was on the 15th attempt that he finally succeeded. The being floated in the artificial womb, limbs slowly forming, features shifting into something almost, but not quite, human. It was an approximation, a blend of human and machine, flesh and synthetic tissue. Its skin was smooth, almost translucent, veins visible beneath the surface. Fennel leaned closer, watching with awe as it blinked for the first time. It had breath, it lived, but it was not human. Fennel did not care. Humanity was flawed, corrupted by emotion and weakness. These new beings, his children, would be better. They would be pure, untainted by the imperfections of their predecessors. And under his guidance, they would build a new world, a better world. As the world outside fell further into chaos, Dr. Fennel's fortress remained a bastion of calm. The last women, those lucky enough to be found and brought in, were safe within his walls. In exchange for their protection, they submitted to his experiments, willingly or not. They had little choice. The world outside had nothing left to offer them. But Dr. Fennel offered them hope, or at least that's what he told himself. The first of the new beings was named Eve. It seemed appropriate, a name drawn from ancient stories of creation. Eve stood in the center of the sterile white room, her gaze empty yet filled with a strange intelligence. She was perfect in form, tall, strong, her skin flawless and pale, her movements precise. But she was not human. "Do you know who I am?" Dr. Fennel asked. Eve turned her head slowly, her eyes focusing on him with an eerie calm. "You are the creator," she said, her voice soft but firm, devoid of emotion. Fennel smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "That's right, and you are the future." For weeks, he taught her. He recited passages from ancient texts, mixing religious teachings with scientific theories. He taught her logic, ethics, and philosophy. He told her stories of the world that was before the disease, before the collapse. Eve listened. She learned, but she did not question. That was until the arrival of the others. The next 5 beings were different. Each one carried some subtle flaw, a remnant of the imperfections that Fennel had not yet eradicated, but they were alive and they were learning. Soon they too were given names: Adam, Lilith, Cain, Abel, and Miriam. Together they began to question their creator. "Why do we exist?" Cain asked one day, his voice sharp and clear. "To save mankind. Fennel replied, pacing in front of them, his hands clasped behind his back. To rebuild what was lost. Why save mankind at all? Asked Lilith, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. Why not let it end, as nature intended? Fennel paused, caught off guard by the question. He had never considered that they might challenge him. But now, standing before these beings that he had created, he felt a flicker of doubt. Because I am the creator, he said finally. And it is my will that you live. For now, they accepted his answer. But as they grew stronger, smarter, Fennel knew it was only a matter of time before they would ask again. And when they did, he feared that his answer might not be enough. The lab was quieter than usual, a stillness that made Dr. Fennel's skin prickle. The hum of the machines, once a constant, comforting sound, now seemed like a reminder of how artificial everything had become. These halls, these lights, even the beings he had created, none of it felt natural anymore. Eve stood in the observation room, staring through the glass at the latest batch of artificial wombs. Inside, new beings were slowly forming. They had no faces yet, no names, but they were alive, at least in the most basic sense of the word. Why do you continue to make more of us? Eve asked, her voice cutting through the silence. She did not turn to face him. She never did when she asked the difficult questions. Dr. Fennel paused, his hands still hovering over the holographic display of the wombs. He had grown used to her questions. At first, they were simple inquiries, curiosity that could easily be sated with a logical explanation. But now there was something deeper behind them, something that worried him. Because we must ensure survival, he answered, his voice calm, though inside he felt a knot tightening in his chest. The disease has made that clear. Humanity cannot be trusted to continue its own legacy. That task now falls to you. Is it survival, she asked, turning her head slightly, if we are not human? Fennel clenched his jaw. He had heard this argument before, from Lilith, Cain, and even Abel. Their questions were becoming more frequent, more pointed. They were starting to question their own existence, to wonder if they were mere tools in his grand design or something more. It was inevitable, he supposed. He had given them intellect, after all. You are more than human, Fennel said, stepping closer to the glass. He looked at her reflection, her sharp features softened only slightly by the light from the artificial wombs. You are the future. Humans were weak, flawed. They let their emotions, their desires control them. But you are different. You are superior. Eve didn't respond right away. She continued to watch the new beings, her expression unreadable. Superior, she repeated softly, almost as if testing the word on her tongue. And yet we still feel, we still think. That makes us imperfect, doesn't it? Fennel's heart skipped a beat. Her understanding was growing faster than he had anticipated. He needed to steer this conversation carefully. Perfection is not the absence of emotion or thought, he said, trying to keep his tone even. It is the ability to control them. That is what sets you apart from humans. You can feel, but you will not be ruled by your feelings. But if we can feel, if we can think for ourselves, she said, turning to face him fully for the first time, what makes us any different from the humans you despise? He stared at her, the weight of the question settling on his shoulders like a shroud. Eve's dark eyes were sharp, piercing, but there was something else there too. Doubt. He had seen it before, in the others. It was always the same. First the curiosity, then the questions, and finally the doubt. You are different, he insisted, stepping forward, because you were created with a purpose, a higher purpose. Humans stumble through their existence, driven by selfish desires. You are here to correct that, to create a new world, one free from the chaos that destroyed the old one. Eve held his gaze for a moment longer before looking back at the wombs. What if we don't want to live in the world you've imagined for us? The question hit him like a blow. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the first time since he had begun this project, Dr. Fennel felt fear. The fear that his creations, the beings he had meticulously designed, carefully shaped, might not see the world as he did, might not want the future he had so carefully planned. Without another word, Eve left the room, her footsteps echoing down the sterile hallway. Excited for part 2? Give this story a thumbs up. Part 2 will unlock once we hit 100 likes. Let's make it happen.